This is an introduction to Aboriginal heritage and environmental planning in Tasmania. Thank you very much, the Aboriginal Heritage Tasmania unit, for supplying this information. So, Aboriginal heritage can take all sorts of curious forms, including features that may not be recognisable as having Aboriginal heritage value. So, particularly around the coast, there's all sorts of interesting formations that require expert input in terms of understanding. So Aboriginal Heritage Tasmania as a unit administers the Aboriginal Heritage Act. They consult with the Aboriginal community and they work in collaboration with the statutory body, that is the Aboriginal Heritage Council. Their job is to promote the recognition, protection and management of Tasmania's unique Aboriginal cultural heritage. They provide free advice to people like us, to government agencies, to landowners, land managers. So they're particularly interested in working with us in environmental impact assessment because you are the people who are going to be the new government agency, council managers, land managers. So the more that people understand Aboriginal heritage and its values and the process of control around that, the better. Aboriginal Heritage Tasmania also manage Aboriginal cultural values within the TWA, the Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area, in partnership with the Tasmanian Aboriginal community. So just for a bit of context, the timeline when you look at it this way is pretty staggering, with Aboriginal occupation of Tasmania being estimated at somewhere around 35,000 years before present. This is the earliest date for Aboriginal occupation of Tasmania, and it's in the Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area. And you can see some of the key dates around there. The last glacial maximum peak, when the average temperature was about 5 degrees cooler and the sea level was about 120 metres below present levels. So that's when you had a considerable land bridge between the mainland and Tasmania. Through to 12 to 14,000 years before present, where we had the end of the last ice age, temperatures become warmer, sea levels rise, and then at 6,000 you have the sea levels stabilising to form the present coastline. Right through to Aboriginal invasion, and you see that little red sliver, that is the European invasion and the colonisation of Tasmania by white peoples. So the Ice Age represents this amazing rise and fall of sea levels, and I'm not going to be able to show you this here because these are static images, but if you scroll through this video from 45,000 years before present through to today, the overall stunning impression is that it's quite a flux. It's not like the land bridge was there and suddenly there wasn't. There was a big lake, and there are various ways to get between the mainland and Tasmania via land bridges, and so there's this history of connection and disconnection that has gone on over quite a long period of time. So you can see a little bit more detail here of land bridge connection, big lakes forming, and then eventually at 6,000 years before present you get stabilisation of current sea levels. This is important because there are lots of different site types that include artefacts, so things that you might find lying on the ground, quarries, rock shelters, rock markings, modified trees, middens, so this is effectively rubbish dumps of where things like shells are left behind, hut depressions, stone arrangement, burial sites. So some are common, some are less common, and all of these have value as Aboriginal cultural heritage. Artefacts can take lots of different forms, and you can see here some of the different descriptions of the different roles that these particular artefacts played, and a diagram here showing a hammerstone and the way that you might produce a flake. So experts are able to recognise these artefacts in the environment. This is sometimes a difficult task, and so there are artefacts here amongst natural rocks, so unless you know what you're looking for, pretty difficult to pick out. The red circles here are artefacts, and an expert is able to determine that by the way that the shape and the edges on this couldn't be produced naturally. This has been produced by a human hand. Other site types include caves and rock markings, and yeah, these are all really special, amazing places. Middens that are really common that you might be familiar with. Hut depressions, so something that's a little bit more obscure that requires a bit more of an expert eye. And yes, so you can see from the image in the bottom right here what the landscape used to look like under Aboriginal occupation and what might be left, and the immense value of this, but also the difficulty for a layperson in understanding the history of these sites. Other site types include stone arrangements, fish traps, again, might not be particularly apparent to the untrained eye. This is why Aboriginal heritage sites are registered, and so you can see here quite the incredible number of sites that are registered for all sorts of different reasons. So you can see in the close-up that there are different colours here depending on what kind of site it is, and this is not available publicly, but this information is all held by Aboriginal Heritage Tasmania and available to them when they're making assessments. Planners' roles with respect to Aboriginal heritage management. Obviously, it's really important for planners and environmental managers to understand what is Aboriginal cultural heritage, and it's important to understand the permit process. So if a development's being proposed on an area that has Aboriginal heritage value, that there is a permit given and there's an associated legislation that's associated with that, that there is awareness of the existing information that might be held in databases, but also where appropriate site descriptions are done, and that there's just a better level of understanding of best practice and acceptable standards. So when there is proposal to develop that might risk damaging Aboriginal heritage, that this is all handled in a sensitive way. The Act provides for protection and management of these heritage sites if there is a proposal for potential risk to this heritage, that there is a permit applied for, and that permit is granted by the Minister on recommendation of the Director. So it might be a permit to destroy, damage, deface, conceal or otherwise interfere with a relic, and the permit requires requires a permit to undertake excavation or other work to be carried out for the purpose of searching for a relic, and this reporting has to go to DPIPWE, Department of Environment, Primary Industries, Parks, Water and Environment, as soon as practicable after finding a relic. So if a developer is on site and there is something uncovered, then this needs to be reported so the process can be kicked off. Importantly, all Aboriginal relics, whatever the land status, are protected. So whether that's being developed or not, yeah, they're all protected under Section 14 of the Aboriginal Heritage Act 1975. There are guidelines, so these are statutory guidelines under the Act, and it specifies the actions that are required by a person to comply. It's designed to promote proactive consideration of Aboriginal heritage before any works take place. This is an important consideration in environmental impact assessment and part of the precautionary principle that we sign up to as part of ecologically sustainable development. We and the public have a right to expect that impacts are considered before there's any potential to damage. So under LUPA, the land use planning process, unfortunately, Aboriginal heritage is not triggered as part of the RMPAS, the Resource Management and Planning System in Tasmania. So planning authorities don't specifically have to require a developer to investigate Aboriginal heritage under LUPA. Aboriginal heritage should be considered at the earliest stage of projects, but this is a problem because it's not managed under LUPA and it's not triggered by this normal system under the planning scheme. Then it is really easy for Aboriginal heritage considerations to be missed. I know this is a little difficult to read. You don't need to read it. Suffice to say that there are documents that you can find that are around Aboriginal heritage assessment process. So once the Act is triggered and a relic is found, or there's reasonable expectation that something would be found on site, many councils will require this, and a good consultant will advise a developer to get Aboriginal heritage permit so that you don't get to the stage where you've got all your permits and you're undertaking works and then you come across Aboriginal heritage. Works have to stop and this process has to be taken into account, and there are no timeframes like there is under LUPA. So this could be a major spanner in the works. So even though it's not actually triggered under LUPA, a good consultant will do their due diligence, and council will, where they reasonably suspect, advise Aboriginal heritage to be investigated, because if there is something of value and it's not taken care of before work start, big headache. So assessments are required to determine whether there might be impact, so determine the nature and extent of the Aboriginal heritage, to determine whether the proposed development will impact this, to look for ways around this. So like with normal environmental impact assessment, we're looking for information that's relevant to the particular case study so that the decision maker in granting a permit can make a good decision. There is Aboriginal heritage the council is a statutory advisory body, so it's established under the Heritage Act. The council meets monthly and provides advice to the government, so they're not a decision maker. They just, well, I shouldn't say just, they provide advice to government and stakeholders on the protection and management of Aboriginal heritage, but they're not the decision maker in a formal part. They're legally set up under the Act, but they're not the decision maker. They provide advice to the minister. There's a really useful guideline about the standard and procedures that are required for compliance for getting a permit. So you can Google this and find the framework for managing Aboriginal heritage. So I won't worry about the technical details here, but if you're interested in this kind of work, then there are lists of consulting archaeologists and Aboriginal heritage officers who are authorised to provide this kind of advice on a proposal. So the planning tools, Aboriginal Heritage Tasmania can do this desktop review. You can do a property search. Often this just flicks you to a page that says you're going to need to get more detailed information and nothing comes up. But under the Land Systems Information Tasmania, you do have basic information about what heritage values there are, and there is some useful information on the website. Dial Before You Dig also is a trigger for the Aboriginal heritage search to make sure that there isn't heritage values that might be impacted by works. So if you Google this, Aboriginal Heritage Property Search, you can begin the search and pop an address in. And so do have a fiddle around with this and see how it works. So as I said, there are challenges because Aboriginal heritage isn't integrated with the land use planning and approval system. It's a separate approval system. So while people who know their stuff will initiate this process, there is potential either for it just to be completely missed, even though there is heritage values on site, or for it to happen at a really inconvenient time that annoys the developer no end. There is ongoing consultation with the Aboriginal community. Well, it depends on the case, but this might be required. And permit conditions and mitigation actions might be required before the commencement of work. So a quick scenario, this is a car park upgrade. There are artefacts on site that are shown here with the yellow circles. Here's a Greenfields site and a pretty extensive site. You can see here from the topography and the very use that there might be all sorts of potential here for Aboriginal heritage. So yeah, given the nature of the site and any existing information that might be available on the desktop, there might be a site review required here. So in summary, it's important that there is early engagement. So if there's any reasonable suspicion that Aboriginal heritage might be impacted, this needs to be done before any kind of permit or work start. Unfortunately, it's not a process that's under the existing land use planning system, and because of a lack of timeframes, unlike the normal planning timeframes, it can take a long time. So this is important reason to get things started early.